Well, hello to everybody. My second video of the day. Fix up my mat of my head, and go into the next subject. Hope you enjoyed the Citron video. I'm trying to find more of those vehicles relevant to the time span of the Second World War, and I'll build them. But somebody wanted me to do one of dogfight plane on plane, so I thought about it, and this is what I came up with. In 1940, when the British were fighting in North Africa, they had an island in the eastern Mediterranean called Malta. It was used as a way station to send supplies in so that the British could fight North Africa and maintain their colony in Egypt. During that time, the Italians were involved along with the Germans, and initially it was the British fighting the Italians for supremacy and for domination. Well, Malta was important, and close to Italy. Italy could actually go and attack and bomb Malta. Also, the Germans too, from bases in Italy. And then initially, Malta had no air defense. They had three Gloucester Gladiator biplane fighter planes that were there trying to shoot down Italian bombers and whatever planes the Germans put in, and then they brought Hawker Hurricane fighters in, but then the Germans came in and they threw a bunch of Me-109s in, and did not do well for the Hawker Hurricanes. And plus, the island was bombed to oblivion. I think it was the most bombed island or place in World War II. It was continuously bombed. Well, 1941 rolls around, and Germany's getting ready to go into Russia. Operation Barbarossa, so a lot of their heavy equipment is going. Malta is struggling. There's no way they could be defended or protected unless you bring in better equipment. Better equipment being this. The Spitfire, especially the Mark V version, which is this one, with a 20mm cannon and 4 machine guns in the wings. These initially took off of aircraft carriers. The USS Ranger and the HMS Eagle dropped off Spitfires, and the Spitfires started coming to supplement the Hurricanes that were getting slaughtered. The reason the Hurricanes were getting slaughtered, it wasn't just because of the German Me-109Fs that started to come in, but because of this plane. The Macchi C202 Folgore, which means lightning. Let's just call it that, the Macchi Lightning, an Italian fighter plane. Great plane that had a radial engine, but was able to get blessed with a Daimler-Benz supercharged V12 made by Fiat or Alfa Romeo, and they were put into these planes. So what did it do to this plane? Well, it can go up to higher altitudes. It had a liquid-cooled engine. The speed increased to 375 miles an hour for this plane, if you can believe that one. Extremely maneuverable plane. I mean, this thing can come in and it just cut rings around Allied planes, and had the speed and the handling. If the pilot was good, to cause mayhem. This plane initially had a very kind of a basic armament. It had 2 heavy machine guns, 12.7s, in the nose, and 2 in each wing, like where this part is over here on each side. This one here has a mixed armament because it also has a 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, which was possible with this Daimler-Benz DB601 engine, now called Alfa Romeo whatever, that Fiat that they were producing for the Macchi and the other Italian fighters as they went to inline engines. This is a superb dogfighter. I mean, it was actually lower altitudes. It was better than a Spitfire. It could knock it down and really mess with it. The only way the Spitfire can get around is by climbing up high and getting an altitude advantage. This one would have been equipped then with 4 heavy machine guns, 2 in the wings, 2 in the nose, and a 20mm cannon firing. So this is, like I said, well, it's not a heavy armament compared to like the German planes. So the P-51 Mustang when it first went in only had 450 caliber machine guns, which is essentially 12.7mm like these. So this is armed like a P-51C plus a 20mm cannon in the nose. 375 mile an hour top speed and low rolling dogfights. This thing was nasty. I mean, it could cause you all kind of harm. So the British had to figure out a way to rectify that nastiness, so not having them lose their little territory on Malta that they're using as a base. And now, with the Germans pulling out and going to fight the Soviets, they could kind of beef up their stuff there with the conflict in North Africa heating up, and the British wanted to be able to dominate and kick the Germans out. So Spitfires were introduced to the combat, and this is a Spitfire MK5 B. B has two 20 millimeter cannon and four 30 cal machine guns in the wing, two at each wing. The top speed of this plane, about the same as a Macchi. This plane is a lot heavier though, and it was a maneuverable plane, a wonderful plane to Spitfire, but at low altitude like that, the Macchi could like outmaneuver and give it a really, really bad time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the landing gear up on these planes so I can show you them and how they would look as they were fighting. What made Britain good as far as fighting here was that Britain had their Commonwealth pilots, which is basically from different countries within the British Commonwealth, and they flew the Spitfire. And as the Spitfire became more available, the Hurricane was pulled out of combat and then left just a Spitfire as a defender of Malta. And this is where everything kind of gets really, really wild, because you have the Germans going into Russia, and you have basically the Italians who are finding the bulk of the fighter planes are going to be used in this little combat stuff that's going to go down. And so, over the skies of Malta in the Eastern Mediterranean in 1942, you had some of those vicious air battles of the Second World War. You had Italian Savoia Marcati SM-79 bombers bombing, escorted by probably these planes, and escorted in number enough where the British had to actually work with their Spitfires to handle these in a dogfight. Most of the dogfights were at low altitude, returning dogfights, which I'll show you. This plane can turn really good. If you see, I mean, just holding it like this, the way it would, and so it'll get right on your butt. What makes it even more difficult is it has speed. It can hang on you and then take you out. And there's really not much you could do about it. And at that point, it comes to the pilot that's inside the cockpit of the individual plane determining who wins the battle. The British had a lot of pilots that were really good pilots that flew, more so than the Italians have. The Italians had really good pilots, so it's just that the British were fought in the Battle of Britain and other little things that have come in their way. And so this Spitfire was actually very good here. I mean, they put a dust filter on some of them because Malta's a dusty island, so that dust wouldn't go into the Rolls-Royce engines on here. And this plane, like I said, speed-wise very close, but this had better altitude performance. So this plane can get up high on top of the Macchi, which we fly in there, and use basically energy. The energy of the plane, the weight, the ability to get power and go fast, to swoop down on these and nail them with a 20 millimeter cannon. This plane, though, if the pilot was good enough, he could turn really, really tight, a low speed turn, which the Spitfire would not actually be able to handle that well. The Spitfire would kind of go underneath him like that, and then you'd have a case of the Macchi knocking the snot out of the Spitfire out of the sky. What happened was the raids and stuff started getting worse about 1942, and the Italians increased the bombing pressure, but it started to level off because they were also needed to go with the Germans to fight in the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. But the pilots that were fighting the British on Malta were high quality, really good pilots, and they took a lot of Allied pilots down and out. By the time the fall of 1942, El Alamein was coming up, and basically the siege of Malta was over. Malta was sorting and holding tons of supplies that would go into the North Africa campaign to fight the Africa Corps. And a lot of these Spitfires, some of them would go into North Africa, but most of them stayed in Malta to protect the shipping lanes around Malta and to make sure that Britain had logistical support for North Africa by whatever things were, in terms of equipment, that were taken to Malta and then ferried to Egypt afterwards. Well, that's why Malta was so important. The British didn't have that. The logistic train would have been worse, and it would have been kind of hard for them to conduct in North African operations. But you see some of the biggest dogfights and battles, though, involving these two planes. And the Allies got to respect the Macchis with the Daimler-Benz engines. They were a superb aircraft, equal to anything that the Allies had. And if you had really good pilots flying these planes, buyer beware of the pilots flying the other plane. And at that point, late in 1942, right before the landings, down Operation Torch that came in, I think it was September-ish or whatever, and then also our little operations in the eastern part, Alamein, where the pushing the Germans and what are left of the Italians across North Africa to push them towards where the French and French North Africa, and where the U.S. landed during Operation Torch, and that's how they were eliminated. But if Malta would not have been secured, they would not have been able to do a lot of that. The eastern part of the campaign would have suffered because they wouldn't get the supplies that were needed, and eventually they would have taken it all over, but it would have taken a lot longer. And by defending the area of Malta, being able to come up and letting the 8th Army, which is Montgomery's army, be ready to fight Rommel, the war was able to go the way that it went by putting pressure on the Axis, the Italians and the Germans, in both the East and the West, and forcing them to the West, where eventually they were defeated. And from there, we moved on to Italy, Sicily, and then Italy. But during these hectic months, you had these two aircraft, the Macchi and this plane, the Spitfire MK5. And like I said, it's a toss-up to who would win. The top speed of both planes are very similar. I know the Spitfire is heavier, but the way the Spitfire's elliptical wings were in design, and it could climb to altitude. It had a higher ceiling, so we could get up there and give it an advantage in a dogfight higher up against the Macchi. Lower-wise, it would depend on how aggressive and how good the Italian pilot was trying to claim the Spitfire, and vice versa for the British pilot trying to claim that Italian ace that was flying the Macchi around. So that's all I have for this. The reason I haven't been doing a lot of videos is I've been trying to find a model of a Type 99 Chinese tank. Because, I've built those Sembo jets and that Chinese Black Hawk, the Harbin helicopter. And they don't have a decent Type 99 tank. All the models that I've seen are like toys. They're not like Kobe, Sembo, or what's that other company? Guan, where they actually make decent tank models. So you're forced to get these kind of like, I don't know, like toys that you see on a Power Rangers thing, and they don't look as authentic. So what I'm going to do, I have an East German T-72 tank and an East German MiG-29. I'm going to build those and incorporate them as what they were historically and why the East German military was using them. But as a show thing, with the war still going on in Ukraine, you have MiG-29 still flying about. You have T-72 tanks about. I'll give you a little bit closer up detail of them, a little bit better history, and kind of can see what's out there and doing whatever. And I have a few other things planned, but as of now, that's what I'm planning on doing. And I might do a video on writing instruments again. That sounded kind of boring, but I'll figure it out. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little something and weren't totally bored. And I will have another video in a couple of days again. Thank you and goodbye.